such a powerful heritage. My name is Amir Korangy. I'm the publisher of The Real Deal, and I'm also the moderator for this event today. And we're going to go right into it. This is the new development panel. First, we have Steve Witkoff, the chairman of the Witkoff Group. Steve has $1.5 billion in New York City construction alone that we know of. In addition to the Park Lane Hotel, which he's currently in the process of converting, he's also doing the biggest deal in the last 25 years in Times Square, with 7 openings, 7 in the heart of Times Square. Michael Stern is sort of an anomaly. He appeared out of nowhere and quickly became one of the biggest. Michael Stern, he appeared out of nowhere and quickly became one of the biggest developers in New York City. He's in company with Excel and Related. Michael currently has 1.5 million square feet in New York City construction, including the fabulous 111 West 57th Street, which is slated to be the tallest building in Manhattan, tallest residential building in Manhattan. His first conversion was the Walker Tower, which achieved record success in Chelsea, and he recently sold a penthouse of $50 million, which was, that's why he can't stop smiling. That's good. Miki, as head of Miki Naftali from the Naftali Group, he was the head of development for a lot. He spearheaded one of the most notable projects ever seen in Manhattan, the conversion of the Plaza Hotel to condos. Since then, he's left a lot and has established a track record on his own in the last few years with new projects all around Manhattan and Brooklyn. Miki currently has 8 projects underway in Manhattan, in the Upper West Side, in the West Village, which we can't mention for some reason until it's further along, and Chelsea and some other places. And Jonathan Miller is our residential market guru. His quarterly reports are the most trusted and reliable source of what's going on in the market. He's been on the cover of the New York Times 12 times or something like that. And he's also a very nice guy, and we use him for everything. I told him earlier that he should be on our payroll, but thank God he's not, because he probably can't afford it. So that's good. All right, so we'll start right away with prices per square foot. Everybody here has several million under in construction right now. I you're here to keep it on the story.
I did build a shed in my backyard from Home Depot.
Prices per square foot today are pretty crazy, up to $7,000 a foot. Less than 30% of the new developments that are in the pipeline are going to be priced below $3,000 a square foot, which means that 1,000 square foot apartment is going to cost $2 million or more on most of these new developments. How much further can these prices go? I'll start with Steve.
Well, we just finished 2 projects in New York City. They're finished selling them. That is 150 Charles, around $3,500 a foot, and 10 Madison Square Park West, just crossing $3,000 a foot. And the pricing was great. We just looked by the background, certainly beyond what we pro-formed by a pretty wide margin. But rents are high. People want to be in Manhattan today for all the right reasons. I used to feel that Dodd-Frank and everything that was happening with the banking industry was going to be a drag on job growth in this city. And the fact is, there's enormous technology job growth in New York City. And you could make an argument that those guys are making more money than a lot of the bankers are, because a lot of their compensation is in shares on a lot of these new IPOs. So, you know, the data that we're seeing is we've got tremendous, we've got a lot of buying activity from people who are working in the tech world. So, I think if you're well located, you sell.
I mean, 150 Charles, did you expect to hit the numbers that you guys said? Was that what it was underwritten for?
No, 150 Charles was underwritten at, I want to say, $2,200 a foot originally. And so we got about 35. And 10 Madison Square Park West was underwritten at $1,850 a foot. And we're at 150 Charles, I mean, you could make an argument we undersold it because we sold it in 12 weeks. And 10 Madison Square Park West, we're probably around 95% sold. And that, we're probably around 95% sold. And that building at 10 Madison Square Park West, which we pro-formed at $1,850 a foot, is trending just north of $3,000 a square foot today. And it probably moves up because we've retained a lot of the apartments up top to sell.
If I can ask everyone to quiet down, please, because it's a little hard to hear. Miki, you have 8 projects underway right now, and are you hoping to see the same sort of results that Steve did with 150 and 10 Madison Square?
Well, I want to take a step back before that. I think the question originally was where we see the pricing going from here. So, you know, what obviously what Steve experienced and what we all experience in the market is quite amazing. But you know, my personal view is that we are not going to see the same escalation in the near future, not in this cycle, at least in my opinion. Think about it. For example, Steve underwrote 10 Madison Square at $1,850 a foot and sold at $3,000 a foot. I converted 225 Fifth Avenue, which was the first conversion on Madison Park, about, I would say, probably now 9 years ago, and I thought that I'm a genius when I blended at around $1,200 a foot. Yeah. So now think about it, from basically, you know, 9 years ago, at $1,200 a foot, 225 Fifth Avenue is a very, very nice building with, you know, a very extensive facade facing south, facing the park. So it's a really nice building. From $1,200 a foot 9 years ago to $3,000 a foot, you know, today, but more important than that, from $1,850 a foot that Steve underwrote the deal to, you know, in a matter of maybe a year and a half, 2 years, to go up to $3,000 a foot. So, look, looking forward, at least the way that I see it, and, you know, I'm sure all of you guys are today, you feel good and, you know, you feel great because there's a lot of activity in the market and you sell a lot and, you know, we're all very successful. But at the end of the day, if someone think that tomorrow or 6 months from now, or a year from now, the price will continue to go in the same pace, I think it's a mistake.
Well, it's been a 60% increase, right, from 2012 to 2013.
Amazing, yeah. Amazing.
Right.
But now the question, what is next? Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, if anyone wants to underwrite a deal today, based on assumptions that, you know, a year down the road, the price will go even 20 or 25% more, I think it's a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, John.
Just to reiterate, too, I used to say during the last boom that, you know, sort of the magic number was $1,500 a foot, and now I'd like to say that 3,000 is the new 1,500. Essentially, you know, we've more than doubled. And I'm not, you know, in this environment we're in, I'm really not that concerned about the demand side. And Steve pointed out, you know, we have a lot of good things going on in New York City in terms of job growth and just our overall position. And I don't see foreign demand abating, which is a whole other discussion, but abating much over the next few years because of the factors that are driving the demand. The concern is how rapidly we build. The developers, I think, are handicapped by land prices. Yeah. And so the numbers only work if you target the top 10% of the market, more or less, which is sort of the 2,000 a foot threshold. So yet the inventory, you know, for the other 90% of the market is almost the tightest on record. Yeah.
And Michael, your thoughts on that? I mean, when we met about a month ago or 2 months ago, you said that you're going to take a step back and not do anything. And then we met a few months ago, and he had mentioned that he was going to take a step back and wait for the market to sort of figure itself out. But he didn't take his own advice, and he's been buying like crazy since. So maybe you can explain that.
That's fair. Look, I worry a lot about land prices, and what I see happening is basically very optimistic underwriting being people are stretching neighborhood boundaries and convincing themselves that subpar locations are going to do the same thing as a 10 Madison Square West or a Prime West Village, and people are convincing themselves like that areas like Nomad and other areas are going to blend at $3,000 plus a foot. And I think that's problematic. I have less of an issue with people paying premium prices in premium locations along the High Line, along Central Park. Those are the areas that, even in a downturn, are going to be relatively protected. But as Miki said, people are basically using forward-looking projections not only on prices but on performance within neighborhoods, and that worries me a lot. So I have no problem paying a little bit more in a frothy market for a premium location and a premium product. It's the secondary stuff that makes me very nervous.
But I mean, you're in Brooklyn as well, so you do a lot of stuff in Brooklyn. I know you get a lot of media attention for the big stuff that you do in the city, but you do stuff in Brooklyn pretty regularly. And do you consider that?
Brooklyn's interesting because, frankly, I think there's more growth opportunity in Brooklyn than in Manhattan for a number of reasons. I think the sort of the equation of hard cost versus land price is backwards right now in Manhattan. Land prices have escalated to the point where your hard and soft costs are less than your land acquisition on a lot of these deals, and that was never the case. This is sort of fundamentally broken underwriting in a lot of cases. In Brooklyn, that is not the case. Land prices have escalated, but not as rapidly. There's still a lot of room to grow. I think actually if you look at the condo supply pipeline in Brooklyn, there's actually a lot less inventory coming down the line in Brooklyn on the condo side than in Manhattan. If you look at a market like Park Slope, if you search for a new construction condominium in the true borders of Park Slope, there is zero product on the market. There isn't a single unit there to buy right now. And I think that's true in a couple of Brooklyn neighborhoods. So Brooklyn is very interesting to us because we think that some of those metrics where you underwrite one thing and you're disciplined in your basis, so you're not relying on this very optimistic underwriting, but you hope that you'll do better than your underwriting. We think there's still some opportunity in Brooklyn. We think that's sort of sailed in Manhattan. And we've seen that. And look at Walker Tower, we underwrote something like $1,800 a foot. We blended to about $4,300 a foot. In fairness, skewed by a couple of very big penthouse deals. At Stella Tower, which is a deal we're selling now, we're more than half sold. We're blending at about $2,400 in Hell's Kitchen.
That's reasonable. Those are reasonable compared to some of the other stuff out there. Right?
We agree. We think we're leaving a lot of money on the table. But we underwrote that deal at $1,300 a foot, and we're doing about $2,400. So
what I'm really curious about is who these buyers are. I mean, who's paying $3,000, $2,000 a square foot? I know because of fair housing you can't say exactly who, but I talked to some brokers and they were mentioning that pretty much most of the people who are coming there are foreigners, especially in the Midtown area, in the 157s and places like that. But then we had a discussion with Bill Rudin, who's doing Greenwich Lane, and he said 70% of the people who are buying Greenwich Lane are from Manhattan or the tri-state area, and about 40% of those people are from downtown. And about 40% of the people buying in Greenwich Lane are from the downtown area. So it's not necessarily people coming, from all over the world. But I'm curious, Steve, like your place at 150 Charles Street, like most of your buyers, where were they from?
So I think it's a smattering. At 150 Charles, we had roughly 5 foreigners buy. All of those foreigners were...
Out of how many units?
Well, we had 96 apartments, but we probably had 15 combinations. So maybe it's 80 apartments. But we had 5 foreigners. But those foreigners are really not pure foreigners as you would define them. It's this is not the complexion, but as an example, it's a Goldman Sachs partner who was sent over to London for 5 years, now coming back to Goldman Sachs, and he qualifies technically as a foreign buyer. At 72nd Street, the Miraval, where we bought the debt there and then put the apartments back out to the market, we probably, I don't know what the percentages are, but we certainly had a higher proportion of foreigners. But at that building, we had a raft of empty nesters coming out of Long Island because we were averaging there somewhere between $1,400 and $1,700 a foot, and it was perceived as a value play. So we had plenty of empty nesters there. At 10 Madison Square Park West, we had some foreign buyers, plenty of New Yorkers. Remember, this is on Madison Square Park, where right in the middle of that technology explosion. And so we have a lot of people working in the tech world. But I see the buying from everywhere. I mean, there is traction from literally every sector in the marketplace. And let me tell you, I'll give you an example of what I'm hearing. you know, I think you have on your question list that, I think you do, that you wanted to talk about EB5 and things of that sort. You're going to see all these EB5 people, all these EB5 regional centers are now calling places like Douglas Elliman, and they're saying, all my EB5 people who invested $500,000 in qualified projects, they're coming to New York, they want to buy apartments. So what can we buy? So you're going to see traction even more so from the Chinese. New York is just a pretty great place. And it's you know, it's counterintuitive to me, and Jonathan, I think, would probably be the best to speak to this, but I can remember we were buying Miami in 2008. We liked the pricing. To us, Miami in 2008 looked like downtown Manhattan in 1992. And so, you know, the only mistake we made, and Howard Lauber we do a lot of business together, is we didn't buy enough of it, but we had our opportunities. And every time there was a currency devaluation in Latin America, we used to think to ourselves, the buyers are going to come out of the marketplace. But in fact, they came more into the marketplace with more velocity. When Venezuela currency devalued, you'd think they lost 20% of buying power, but in fact, the residents of Venezuela were worried that there was another currency devaluation that was going to come right on their heels, and they poured more into the Miami marketplace. And I actually believe that that's a condition that exists even more so in New York. New York is a safe harbor. It compares from a pricing perspective better than cities that I would regard as its competition, Hong Kong, London, Tokyo. And when there are problems out there, the money pours into this town. I don't believe with what happened in Russia, I don't believe that those conditions stop the Russian flow of money. I think it's going to increase the Russian flow of money when, in fact, currency controls come off, because people get nervous about where their money is. And I think Manhattan real estate is considered almost as good as gold, and that's the perception out there.
You have a term for that, right, Jonathan?
Well,
real estate as a currency?
Yeah, I call New York, or luxury real estate, as this new global currency. In many ways, with all the volatility, or, you know, we had in the Europe, we had it's stabilizing now, but they're still sort of drifting into recession. It's very weak. You have the Chinese trying to diversify, trying to get their money out. You have a very high cost of investing in South America, like Brazil. The Brazilians are trying to pull their money out. It's difficult. And they come here, and it's very inexpensive, relatively speaking. So it's a long-term view. That's why I'm not concerned about, I think we have a lot of volatility post-financial crisis that's still sort of swirling around in the global economies. And New York, ironically, is sort of, you know, where a lot of with Wall Street, a lot of the problems started with exotic finance products. We end up being this global safe haven. The other comment I'd make is that I think that, you know, in the conversations about New York real estate and high-end real estate, and Steve had touched on this too, the demand isn't just foreign buyers. We get this impression that all the activity in New York City is Chinese and Russians, and it's ridiculous.
What would you say that accounts for? Like, just
Well, in the new development space, and I have no idea because it's just anecdotal, but I'd say it's 50-50. 50%.
So 50% is significant. I mean,
on new development.
Right.
On just as a participation in the market, it's more like a third, but it's skewed higher on the new development side. New Yorkers and people from this region and other parts of the U.S. are buying here, and it's not just about, it has nothing to do with currency. That was the idea in the beginning. Oh, well, you know, when the euro is, you know, the dollar's weak and blah blah blah. It really is a long-term equity play. It's all about asset preservation. It's not about, you know, I'm playing the dollar off against my currency. It has nothing to do with that. It really is. There's so much uncertainty, and uncertainty drives people to park their. You know, one of the things that I describe the phenomenon is, you know, we're building the world's largest bank safety deposit boxes, where you put your valuables in the box and you don't visit very often.
Right.
that's part of the phenomenon, I think, on the foreign buyers looking at development here.
Well, Michael, in terms of land prices, I mean, land prices are just going crazy. I mean, that's why you have to underwrite the projects for the prices that you guys do. But you just saw Related buy a garage near the High Line for $200 million. And I think close to what you paid for your place at for 111 West 57th, which is, you know, is going to be the tallest building in the city. But what do you think is going to happen to land prices, and how are developers going to be able to afford these and think that they can underwrite them? You know, are you going to get deals with more hair on them, or how are you going to find land that's reasonable?
Well, first of all, just generally, all the very easy deals were done a long time ago.
Speak up. Okay.
Sorry. Just generally speaking, all the easy deals that didn't have hair on them were done a long time ago. There's none of those left. Everything has some sort of hair on it, whether it's a tenancy issue or it's an entitlement issue that you need a discretionary approval. Every deal has something generally these days. But as far as land pricing, I think a lot of it's going to hinge on what our new mayor does. Is there going to be a greater affordability requirement? That's going to lead to an adjustment.
If I could ask you guys to speak right into the mics.
Sure.
That would...
I think some of the things that could affect land prices going forward is a change in policy from the administration. If we're required to build more affordable housing moving forward, there's going to be a natural realignment of land prices by the private sector to account for that requirement to build more affordable housing. There are various factors that can come into it. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where it's going, but as I said, I'm very concerned about land prices being unsustainable where they are now, as it sits now. Although, interestingly, as you said, nobody's doing $2,000 or sub-$2,000 condo product, which used to be the top of the market, right. And that's actually a very underserved market. So,
actually, we are doing, but okay.
Where is that in the Upper West Side?
This is actually in Gramercy. We are building a 21-story building. We are going to open the sales office in early June, actually, so in a couple of weeks. And you know what? This is quite amazing. There is almost no product under $2,000 a foot in the market, and this is one of our projects. I'm very, very excited that we can bring it to market at that price.
You have no competition.
Well, yeah, there is no competition. So, and you know what? Our second project that we are going to open in late June is actually in Chelsea on 25th Street, and this product is going to be at a $2,000 a foot. Again, great block, great location, you know, a new construction. So I think it's impossible to do it today. If you buy land today, you cannot do it. But we bought it a year ago. It sounds like 10 years ago, but only a year ago. And and frankly, those two deals, we had to work a lot. It was an assembly. We had to work with tenants. We had to work with multiple sellers. We had to work. Even one of them, we bought we bought actually shares in a co-op, and we had to buy another share, and so on and so forth. But in a matter of 4 to 6 weeks, we put together those two development sites in a way that we can deliver a really, really great product to the market at either just under 2,000 a foot or at 2,000 a foot. But it really depends. Look, at the end of the day, in my opinion now, we're going back to the basic. It's going back to anything that you do today, that you buy today, or you own, the last couple of months. It's really going back to basic. It's about location, and actually the specific inventory in the specific neighborhood. So, for example, on West 77th Street, just off Broadway, we are building a new 18-story very high-end building. Now remember, most of the Upper West Side is within the historic district. So 82nd Street, for example, which we sold out in 12 weeks, is actually within the historic district. So we couldn't really build a high-rise or a mid-rise. On 77th Street, it's a very, very narrow area that is outside the historic district. So we are building 18-story ground-up construction, only 25 units because those are big units between, I would say, 3 to 5,000 square feet. The penthouse is much bigger. And over there, we'll get around 3,000 a foot. But if you look at the Upper West Side, the prime Upper West Side today, new product, there is absolutely nothing. You guys going to tell me there is anything in the Upper West Side, brand new product, the prime Upper West Side? Absolutely nothing. So we are going to deliver 25 units, that's it, in 2015. So it really depends. If you find those neighborhoods, there is nothing, there is no inventory, I think, you know, and obviously you buy it right, I think that there is, you can sell very quickly.
So we're talking about these incredible growths and how prices have gone up 60% for new development from year over year. Jonathan, the last time we saw patterns like this, how are these patterns different from the last time? I mean, you've been studying the market for as long as I've been born, I think.
Since I was 5.
Yeah, right.
So it's interesting.
10 years ago, right?
Right, 10 years ago, exactly. Thank you. It's very different than the last go-around because we're in a market that is a cash market on the new development for the end user because credit has not. Actually, today, credit is about as tight as it was when Lehman collapsed, according to the Fed, although yesterday there was a big announcement from Fannie Mae, which I think will go a long way in helping ease credit for consumers who get a mortgage. But what's very different is, the product is much more high-end. Before, it was sort of, the last go-around, it was upper middle to high-end. Now it's almost exclusively high-end, I mean, you know, across the market, and the buyers are paying cash. And we have a much higher, I think, concentration of foreign buyers that are not speculators. We're not seeing the flipping and that sort of activity going on. It's a long-term hold, which makes me feel a lot better in terms of, you know, how this plays out.
Steve, you've had a couple of grand slams in the last couple of years. Are you planning on taking it easy and seeing what the market does, or?
Well, first of all, we own 3 other sites, and
are you looking for additional land and the conversions?
No, I think the pricing is getting a little bit up there, and it doesn't make any sense to me that it's going to stay up there, and not because I don't think the market's going up. It may go up, it may not go up. I don't see any reason why it comes down, and I'll comment on that in a second. But the reason it doesn't make any sense to me that land prices stay that high is because the traditional construction lenders, Wells Fargo, M&T, B of A, are very, very conservative in the way they think about things. So a year ago, you had a bunch of alternative lenders, mortgage REITs, that put a lot of money out because they had to get it out. I think that day is over, and you're really not going to see a lot of that financing out there, particularly in an escalating construction cost marketplace. And I mean, if you start looking at where the yield curve is and how you got to finance and so forth and so on, a lot of these projects, it's just hard to justify the risk when you're paying $800 to $1,000 a square foot in land price, and I mean, even at $3,000 a square foot, those break evens are getting right up there. So we'd be a buyer. I mean, we'd buy anything that we thought was reasonable, but I just don't see land prices. The highest price we paid for land was 101 Murray at $520 a foot, and we thought that was obscene. I mean, I choked on that deal at $520 when I bought it. I remember calling the Fisher brothers and saying, you know, do you really want to do this? You know, today we look smart, and believe me, we're no smarter today than we were back then. But the reason I also don't see anything coming down is for all the reasons Jonathan just identified. I mean, think about like the conditions out there. You have an accommodative Fed. They've come right out and they've said, well, we may be pulling back on, we may be tapering a little bit, but we're watching it really closely. And if economic conditions don't move to, she doesn't want to say this, Janet Yellen, but if we don't see 4% GDP growth in the fourth quarter of this year, which people are now beginning to think is at least 50-50. So if we don't see 4% GDP growth and we're not handing off to a jobs recovery, I'm going to put my foot right back on the pedal. As opposed to Europe, where Europe, okay, you could make, I mean, I know some really smart guys who said, you got to buy Europe 60 days ago. And I owned Europe quite a bit. And I know some other smart guys who say, it's deflationary there. There's a real risk of deflation there. I mean, anybody who made European trades in the property market in the last 30 days, watching what the ECB did in the face of those economic statistics in the last 30 days, which is we're going to sit tight and we're really not sure what we're going to do, when there's probably more of a chance of deflation happening there, I think they'd be pretty nervous about what their exit strategy is on those assets that they bought. So my point is, we're living in a country where, A, we hand off to a jobs recovery, and then it's really game on, or B, we've got a Fed that says we're going to keep it going. And then, of course, we have an administration that can't afford to see a real big move in interest rates, because if there is a big move, and this is the one thing, this is, in my opinion, the secret sauce, if there's a big move in interest rates, then you've got an exploding fiscal problem. So in my opinion, my bet is we don't see a big move in interest rates at least through the end of the Obama administration. So with those economic conditions, I'm not saying the market's moving higher, but it's not like I'm buying everything I can. I haven't bought anything in a little while, but I just don't see why the market comes down.
And what are the most overrated areas and underrated areas in the market right now? Michael, I'll start with you and I'll come down.
Overrated and underrated. Listen, I think that there's a lot of excitement about Hudson Yards and what that's going to do to the neighborhoods around it. But I think that the change, while it's going to be certainly game-changing and it'll be very exciting, I think it's going to come slower than most people are anticipating. You know, the first couple of buildings will be a couple of great buildings in what is still a pretty desolate neighborhood. It's going to take, 10 years for that neighborhood to really be a neighborhood. So I think there's a lot of fervor and excitement about some of the areas around Hudson Yards that's maybe a bit premature.
So you believe Hudson Yards to be sort of overrated?
No, I don't. I think it's going to be an incredible game changer. I just think the people are overestimating the timing of the impact that Hudson Yards is going to have. I think it's going to absolutely be a game changer. But again, as I said, when the first office tower is built, it's going to be a spectacular office tower with a lot of construction around it for a very long time. So I think that there just has to be a little bit of an infusion of reality on timing on the fervor around Hudson Yards.
And in terms of the most underrated area, and think of all the 5 boroughs.
Right. I still think it's neighborhoods in Brooklyn, frankly. I still think the most area for growth is areas in Brooklyn along mass transportation, areas in Gowanus and Bushwick and other areas. A neighborhood like Gowanus, where I think Miki's building quite a bit as well. The city is proposing a massive rezoning. It's between 2 great neighborhoods, Carroll Gardens and Park Slope, and it's all industrial and it's ripe for redevelopment, and a lot of it's already happening with Lightstone.
Dollar for dollar, are you seeing greater returns in Brooklyn than in Manhattan?
No. I'm seeing greater safety, frankly, not greater returns.
All right. Miki?
Look, at the end of the day, I wouldn't name a specific neighborhood. It's really about the inventory, what is in the pipeline and what is coming to market. Obviously, Brooklyn as a whole, there are certain neighborhoods that definitely there is no real condominium projects that were built in the recent years. I think I spoke with David from Apartment and Lofts upstairs. They are doing a lot in Brooklyn. He has many projects right now, I think 40 of them, condominium projects, but I asked him, okay, how many total units in those 40 projects? 450. Right. Okay, and they are probably the biggest in Brooklyn. So, that's not a lot. So, you know, you see a movement in Brooklyn from rental to condo only because you can't pay $250 or $300 a foot for land and then, you know, pay probably 35% more on hard costs than I paid a year ago and build rental.
And that's why nobody's building rentals in Brooklyn.
Exactly. Now,
Right.
no one
So
can
everybody's
start.
building condos. That's
Correct.
The
So
only thing that makes sense.
the next move is towards condos. But when you go back to Manhattan, is really, look, it's about inventory. You know, so again, I mentioned before, but that's not the only neighborhood. There are different neighborhoods. You know, when I look at the Upper West Side, for example, there is no inventory. I look at the Upper East Side, there is a little bit more inventory, but each project that is coming to market is doing extremely well. So it really depends. For us, we're looking at the inventory, what is in the pipeline, and what, you know, if we can bring it, deliver it to the market at a reasonable price.
Give me a neighborhood. give me one, come on.
So again, we love the Upper West Side. We have 3 projects right now. Out of the 9, we have 3 projects only in the Upper West Side. But, you know, how many units we deliver altogether? 100 units. That's nothing.
It's something. It's, Jonathan?
I look at, so first of all, the answer is I don't have any neighborhoods that I could single out one way or the other. I guess the way I'd look at it is, you know, if I think back about 25, 30 years ago when I started here, the spread in, for example, in Manhattan between the low-cost neighborhood and the high-cost neighborhood was far higher then than it is now, that there's been a homogenization. That's why many times, at least in the Manhattan conversation, you don't have the same disparity in pricing, especially in new product, than you would have seen, you know, a lifetime ago. So I think it all comes down to specific locations and what makes sense.
Thanks for that.
I should have been a lawyer.
Stephen?
I like it. I'm a big believer in New York, so I'm not sure that I could identify a neighborhood.
Thank you. Stephen is a lawyer, so that explains it. Short and to the point. I didn't hear anybody mention Queens or anything changing in the Bronx, but I guess I won't go into that. Are you guys even looking in those areas?
We are not looking, no.
So I was going to take a few questions from the audience, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
No disrespect to the panel, except for possibly Mr. Stern. Tremendous projects and the profits that are being generated on these projects. I congratulate everybody. Everybody is entitled to make an adequate wage. I do want to know why the workers, the construction workers on your project, Mr. Stern, have been exploited. We talked about the rates. We talked about the cost. I'd like to know why that isn't passed down to the workers that are building those very beautiful projects.
Michael, you don't have to answer that. I don't know if this is the place for that. I was kind of looking for a market question.
I'm concerned if we're worried about the communities and the neighborhoods and making things robust. I would think that everyone deserves to make an adequate wage. And the workers that are being exploited on Mr. Stern's projects can't possibly do that. Now, we can snicker and we can say I'm an idiot, but the reality is they deserve to make an adequate wage.
Well, everyone deserves that.
And there's no disrespect to that power, which I hold in high regard. But that's not my sentiments towards Mr. Stern. So that's a question. I mean, are they going to be continued to be exploited?
I think it's more of a thought than a question. But
No, it's a fact. We can tell you what the adequate wage is for a construction worker in New York City, and we can tell you what Mr. Stern is paying.
Russ, go ahead, Russ.
That's not a valid
It seems
question.
like a lot of these new developments that are being built or slated to be built are much larger, luxurious units in these buildings. What do you see for the future of smaller units in Manhattan?
Is that
That's for her.
Is that
anyone? Well, I think so. First of all, size of units that are being built have been trending larger, especially on the new development space. The average square footage of something built today averages some of the neighborhood about 300 square feet larger than it was a decade ago, and that's just responding to the luxury market, demand for luxury product. So the question is, and I find it fascinating, there's all this talk about the micro units. You just have to go to Tudor City. They're about the same size as the micro units that are being touted. The Manhattanites are already living in some very small apartments. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, maybe on the rental side, but not on the condo side.
And with land prices like this, it just wouldn't make sense.
The math doesn't work because there's a premium for larger contiguous space in the city. 1 + 1 = 2.5. I like to say, you know, you have a higher per foot generated with larger units. So unless there's some sort of government subsidy, I don't know how economically you're going to see a lot of tiny units being introduced to the market.
Mm-hmm. Miss, go ahead. Can you speak up, please?
Yes. No one mentioned Harlem. Do you see that maybe the surge is done in Harlem, or is it going to kick back up in a couple of years in terms of new development? Because you guys are speaking mostly on the west side. Do you see,
Steve, go ahead.
So the question is Harlem and what's happening there. I actually started my career there in 1986. I bought 2 properties from the Belkin brothers on 124th and Madison, and so I have a great affinity for it. And I was driving up there the other day, and it's amazing. I mean, there's townhouse rows that have come in on 111th and 116th. I mean, really fabulous looking projects. And I actually think that, and I read with great, I was exuberant when I read yesterday that there's now been a directive from the Obama administration to relax lending standards with Freddie and Fannie. And I think that's going to be huge for places like Harlem. Harlem's an amazing place, it really is. And I've been going there for a long time, and personally, I hope that, I think the resurgence is going to continue. I think there's been a renaissance there, and I think it's going to be a big deal. And I think the easing of credit is really a big deal too. Jonathan spoke about that. You know, in Miami, you can't get a mortgage. I mean, you literally can't get a mortgage in Miami. I mean, I have a guy who runs my Miami office. He couldn't get a mortgage down there. I had to guarantee his mortgage. And he earns a pretty decent living, and he's got good credit, couldn't get a mortgage. So I think as they ease up credit, it's going to open up housing opportunities in Harlem, and that's a really good thing.
Anybody else regarding Uptown? Yes, sir.
So I'm a financier of projects in the city. 2 years ago, every deal we looked at, as we penciled it, we had to work as a rental, and we were putting in 45%, 50% equity to make it work. Now, when the average price is $2,500 a foot or greater, nothing, especially without a 421A, nothing works as a rental. So how are you getting your lenders, especially you, Steve, how are you getting the lenders comfortable to go in the deck at least at 55%? Because even those numbers with today's prices for land, it barely works at a 55% debt level.
Well, I mean, on our projects, I mean, we had 40% equity in those projects, right? There's so.
Today with the higher land prices, you're looking for 50 to 55.
Well, I mean, so in my circumstance, and I'm not saying I'm so smart, it's just, you know, I have what I have, and I have a boutique shop. The highest price I paid for land was roughly $520 a square foot. Like, we're going into the ground on 22 Thames. We're in that deal at $205 a foot. So we own it cheap, and 101 Murray, which we own it $510 or $520 a foot, something like that. So, but you're right, and that's just what I alluded to before. The fact is that when I went to Wells Fargo on both 150 Charles, the loan on 150 Charles is $900 a foot, the construction loan. And that's the same loan, by the way, roughly $900 a square foot, because I have 40% equity in that deal on 10 Madison Square Park West. So that underwrites to probably, I would imagine, a 9 to an 11 debt yield if you underwrote it as a rental. So that's pretty solid underwriting. But the fact is, the whole market has moved, and lenders have moved with it too, as well they should. Well, they've moved. I mean, the fact is that a lender like a Wells will lend more money today because they're seeing the comps. What they're not going to do is loosen their lending standards as to who they're going to lend to, though. And they're very, very concerned about who's got the completion guarantee, what your track record is, have you ever beaten a bank, you know, in your career. I mean, all that stuff exists. And by the way, it's accentuated by Dodd-Frank. So, because they're regulated, these institutions. And so, but of course, now you have other alternative lenders who see the opportunity to make spread. But I believe that's a natural governor on the system, and that's a healthy thing.
By the way, we live in a world where $1.5 billion in construction is considered boutique, so I thought that was interesting. But go ahead, David.
Yeah, I had a question about Brooklyn, since Brooklyn has come up in this panel discussion. There's been a lot of discussion citywide about the impact of gentrification in Brooklyn, particularly along Fulton Street, north of Atlantic Avenue, and going further south into Brooklyn. I wanted to ask how you see that impacting communities and whether you're going to see any pushback in terms of the willingness of communities to fight development, and how it's going to impact pricing both on condos and on rentals in terms of your ability to build in Brooklyn and convert.
Sure. So I think we've seen a lot of pushback on some development already, and you know, frankly, high barriers to entry on development keep prices high. So it's very hard to develop anything of scale in Brooklyn more and more. And I think that it's basically going to be a conversation, which is a new conversation that the mayor is having on the balance of affordable housing and market rate housing, and what the proper balance is between the two. And I think that you're going to see more and more of an engagement between developers and the community on what that right balance is, especially on anything that's discretionary and that needs a ULURP or a variance of any kind. And I think that's already started with Domino. You've seen a last-minute shift and a conversation with the community, and I think that's going to continue into this administration.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all very much. Thank you, panelists. You guys did a good job. And the next panel starts at 2 o'clock.